but I will try and speak a little louder. I think what we're here today is actually really what being a police and crime commissioner is all about, and that is opening up the police service to you. We get told many times that people don't know what's happening in the police service, that no one talks to them, that it's a closed institution. Well, actually, what my job is to do is to make sure that you have access to the Chief Constable and the District Commander, so that you can ask any questions that you want. And there'll be some, if there are some very specific questions, we may not know the answers, but we will come back to you. But it's important that we have this dialogue. It's not a monologue. We will kick off for a bit, but it's very much your meeting, and it's what you decide to make of it. So, do think of some really interesting questions, and anything difficult, obviously, please just ask Nick, not me. So the Police and Crime Commissioner's role started in November, and this was to replace the police authority. The government decided that there was a democratic deficit as oversight of the police, and so therefore it was decided that they would hold an election, and there are 41 police and crime commissioners over England and Wales, and we are doing everything, maybe a few things slightly differently, but we are all making sure that we are the voice of residents, so that that voice is heard throughout all levels of policing. And one of the ways I'm doing that is obviously I need to listen. I can't be a voice if I don't listen. And this today is again another way of making sure that I listen to your concerns. But why me? Well, I decided that my history is I was part of a bakery business for over 25 years. That I was a magistrate in the family, adult and youth bench for 15 years. I was the vice chair of the independent monitoring board at Bristol prison, and I was independent member of the police authority. So you can see I have a real interest in the criminal justice system. And I decided to stand, remembering that I have never stood for anything before in my entire life. I decided to stand because I believe that this role was for an independent, that I didn't believe that there was to be any party politics involved in this role, and that was the reason that I stood. So what does a PCC do? Well, there are various roles. I appointed a Chief Constable and hold them to account, hence our new Chief Constable. Can I still refer to you as newish? Not old Chief Constable anyway, newish. I set the 5-year police and crime plan. I set the annual local precept and the budget, and I commission community safety services. And some of those I will talk about in a few minutes. But it's much wider than the previous police authority, so it's slightly unfair to compare me to the police authority, because it's a much wider remit. It is not only the oversight of the police, but it's also on crime prevention, because obviously if we can prevent crime from happening in the first place, it's a win-win situation, fewer victims and at less cost. Then the oversight of the police, but also then the criminal justice system. So making sure, so that that includes courts, probation, and prison. And it's making sure that a PCC is around so that we join up the dots. Because so often we hear of silo thinking, and especially when it's resourced. And one of the views here, what I'm trying to do is making sure that a victim can have, from the time that they report a crime, right through to possibly the courts, but they may not always necessarily be courts, we get restorative justice and other things. But it's important that they feel that they are really part of the process, and that's what a PCC is here to do. Again, when people say that, what was the point of what is the point of a police and crime commissioner? Well, let me tell you that in the previous year, the police authority had about 170 people who would contact them. In the first 5 or 6 months, since I've been here. If you include the consultation for the plan, we've had nearly 5,000. So there's 5,000 people who've contacted me. So you can see there is a real hunger out there for people to want to get involved. Now some of you may say, the cynics amongst you may say, are they all complaints? No, they're not all complaints. A lot of them is feedback. People want to tell me about their police service. The good, the great, the ugly, but also, just to make sure that they can have their voice, because there is a real, I do believe it's a hunger out there for people to want to engage with our police service. And remember that it is your police service, and that's why I've started these forums now. We will be holding them every 2 months in different places around the patch, across Avon and Somerset, to make sure that residents can make their voices heard. So we've had a very busy 6 months. We have launched the police and crime plan, having been out to consultation, and for this year, for the first year, in recognising that residents told me that how can we have one police and crime plan for the whole of Avon and Somerset? Because as you can imagine, it's a very diverse area. One-size policing does not fit all. The needs of Minehead, the needs of Bath, and the needs of Bristol can be very different. So this year we produced 6 police and crime plans, 1 for each police district, and we have some copies at the back, and it's also available online if you are interested. I campaigned on 4 particular areas which have been the priorities now set for the police. There was antisocial behaviour in their community, and this was done very, very deliberately, because having been to many, many residents' meetings, it was very clear that there was not one meeting I ever went to that antisocial behaviour was not, the subject itself was not raised. And that is because most of us, touch wood, do not come into contact with people, with families where someone's been murdered or with raped, but we almost all know someone who has changed their behaviour because of antisocial behaviour, and it almost eats into the soul of our community. And so I made it, it's been a very definite priority, and one that the police are very focused on. Tackling domestic and sexual violence, particularly violence towards women and children. Again, some men will say, well, what about us? Because obviously, men are victims too. Yes, that is absolutely true. But the majority of victims of sexual violence are women, and violence towards them affects them disproportionately all through their life. Preventing and reducing burglary and fear of burglary in your area. I met a woman several months ago now who was burgled 10 years ago, and she still approaches her front door in fear of that she has been burgled again. Now that she is still a victim. We have not helped her. She is still a victim day in and day out, and we have to think of many ways that we can help residents such as that to obviously to do their best to not to be burgled, but obviously afterwards to recover from that. And then putting victims at the heart of the criminal justice system. We have got to get to the stage where there is much more joined up approach, and I'm working with Bristol City Council, with probation, in order to be able to look at those ways that we can make the journey of a victim far easier. It is one of the most complex businesses. If you saw the journey that the number of contacts that a victim can have, you think that having a crime committed against you would be tough. Well, being a victim, I suspect, is equally as tough, to be honest, because that journey is really, really difficult. But having been out to consultation, one of the things that between 80 and 90% of those who came back to us said that they agreed with those priorities, but there was also another issue that was very clear that they wanted us to add to the police and crime, and that was road safety. And that can mean different things to different people. That can mean cycling on pavements, that can mean speeding through villages. So that is an additional to the police and crime plan, along with visibility and relationships of the police. In referring to the Community Safety Grant, in 13-14 I was given given, that's a lovely phrase, the Home Office decided that the PCC's office was going to be responsible for allocating this grant of £2.4 million. They reduced it from the previous year by 12%, but you'll see that's a constant theme through any money that comes to from the government. But we have 2.4 million, and one of the things that I was being responsible for and being very conscious of, that money had to be allocated fairly across Avon and Somerset. Let me assure you that that Somerset feel very strongly that Bristol gets all the money, and I can assure you that Bristol residents always tell me that as more crime happens in Bristol, that why should Somerset get much? So what we did was we worked out a formula. I'm not saying it's a perfect formula, but it's the best that we can come up with so far. And if anyone has got a fairer formula, I'm very happy to listen to it. But we looked at the population needs, we looked at the multiple areas of multiple deprivation, and we looked at crime, and we worked out this formula about how we could allocate that money through Avon and Somerset. And there are some things that we have funded that what we call above the line, which will be centrally funded, such as ISVAs, Independent Sexual Violent Advisors, who work with rape victims all the way through the process, and making sure that they can recover, that they have practical knowledge, that they have emotional knowledge, so that they can get through the process and getting through the courts as well, because that can be a very, very tough call. We're also funding centrally the drug testing at custody suites, so that is another area that we will be concentrating on in the next year. We've also launched a Commissioner's Action Fund from the 1st of May. This is, having listened to many groups of residents, that there is some incredibly inventive and creative ideas out there, and all for a small amount of money that they can get it up and running. So we've now set up this action fund where we have grants of up to £5,000, where it's for maybe for a piece of kit, or just something that they can get their incredibly great ideas, focusing on antisocial behaviour, on burglary, because it's residents who are on the street, residents on the ground. They know their patch better than anybody, and they know the ways that these things can work. And so the projects that are run by residents have been, and we have been overwhelmed with applications, of which I'm delighted and would welcome more. But other key initiatives, one of the areas that we've looked at is residents have told me that they're not very keen on police marking their own homework, i.e. looking at their complaints. And so what we've done, we've set up a volunteers panel where people from residents were asked to apply, where they will be able to dip sample and look at complaints that the police have done. So we're opening up the organisation so that these complaints can be looked at by a group of volunteers who have no other agenda but to look at these complaints. We're also establishing a business crime forum, because one of the things I've heard from businesses, that because they don't get a vote, that they may not be heard. Because what we need to do is strive to have really strong businesses in our community. Strong businesses will employ more people. If we employ more people, we can see a reduction of crime. It's a very direct correlation. So I'm really working strongly on the Business Crime Forum. As some of you will know, I've come to an agreement with George Ferguson as Mayor to maintain the number of PCSOs in Bristol, of which we now have 110. And we've also looked at, and I asked the Chief Constable to look at the PCSO powers. And I can confirm that, having looked at it, that Nick has now increased the powers, so the PCSOs will now have the powers to detain and to search outer clothing, which was a really important message from residents, that they wanted that, because PCSOs are extremely valuable. They are well regarded by our residents, and they are the key to making sure that we police by consent, and that they are a real strength in neighbourhood policing teams. So that message has come across very, very clearly. Having had several phone-ins on Radio Bristol as well, and I am very much aware of the residents' concerns of cycling, parking on pavements, and specific to the area, things like speeding along Romney Avenue and Sheldon Road, or parking around Southmead Police Station, Southmead Hospital. I realise that is has made a real impact on people's and their homes. I am committed to spending at least one day a week out in the community. Again, this goes back to the fact that to be the voice of you, to be the voice of residents, I need to listen. And so I spend one day a week out in the patch listening to small groups, charities, voluntary organisations, to make sure that I can take that message back to the police. And in fact, last week I was attending the NSPCC to look at and chat to their various people there, and regarding looking also at the young people at the Prince's Trust. And then in the evening I went to Youth Moves, which is an organisation that works out of Knowle West, which was particularly poignant, following the murder of Jake Milton. And it was very interesting listening to see how the young people are working together to support themselves emotionally, because that has made a big impact in Knowle West. And just briefly before I close, I just want to talk about the fact that I'm spending this summer asking residents and getting views on the council tax precept. We have the Chancellor tomorrow will stand up and make some comments about the next spending review, none of which is going to be good. These are going to be very painful comments that he's going to make about their reducing funding. And one of the things that I want to talk to residents and listen to their views about how much we think that we can increase the council tax precept or freeze it. You know, I've met a lot of people who are on fixed incomes, who are with hard-pressed families. But I've also got to say that if I go for a 2% increase on that council tax precept, that's the equivalent of 6p a week. So how much are people prepared to pay? And I am out to listen to as many people as possible as that. So that's a very brief canter through what I've been up to for the last few months. And I think if I ask Nick to speak for a few moments, and then I'll ask John Stratford, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Sue. Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for choosing to be in here and not out there on this beautiful evening. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes just about the changing times at Avon and Somerset Constabulary. I arrived at the beginning of March as Chief Constable, having previously just closed down a big national agency as part of a process that was heralding those changes, more accountability being pushed down to a local level, less of a role for the centre in policing, more accountability in the hands of the local Police and Crime Commissioner, and less money for policing. The constabulary in this spending review period has seen its budget go from around £300 million cash each year to £270 million by next year, and we're expecting, as Sue said, the Chancellor will announce the outcome of the spending round tomorrow afternoon, and it's not my business to preempt what he's going to say, but I'm not expecting him to give me a budget increase for next year at all. And so we face challenging times, and it could be dependent on what the number comes out, it could be, and indeed depending on the decision that Sue makes in the light of your feedback about precept rises, we could be facing a £24 million gap in the budget, which would be effectively not far off a further 10% reduction in the size of the force beyond the 10% reduction that it's already sustained. What does that mean in people? Well, it means that a force that used to be a force of over 3,300 officers is now a force of something under 2,900 officers, and we've similarly reduced the numbers of police staff and our PCSOs, and consequently there are now a shade fewer than 6,000 people in Avon and Somerset Police. Which when I tell people that number, they actually think it's quite a lot. And I encourage officers in thinking about what we do, not to concentrate on how many people have gone and what we're not able to do anymore, but rather how can those 6,000 people work purposefully and creatively and imaginatively and diligently to keep you safe. And your views and your priorities through a session like this are hugely valuable to me. The organisation's been pretty successful. My predecessor, Colin Port, a well-known figure around the area, did a great job. He came to the force at a time when it was recording around 175,000 crimes a year. By the time he left, the force last year recorded a shade under 100,000 crimes. When he arrived, we were detecting around 15% of those crimes, so about 1 in 6. When he left, we were detecting 38% of those crimes, so nearly 4 in 10. His impact was significant, and the investment that he made with the support of the police authority in building a significant operational response to gun crime, serious and organised crime, has, I think, made us all safer, and I pay tribute to the work he did. We have the challenge of maintaining that, and of course we have the challenge of just what comes your way when you're in a busy policing area. We've got Glastonbury this week. A lot of people, I've been with a lot of the operations teams this afternoon at Filton, and they're packing up to get down to Glastonbury. I shall spend Saturday evening there with them, and I can't wait. Next weekend we've got St Paul's Carnival. I shall spend the Saturday evening of next weekend there, and I can't wait for that either. And then we've got the Badger Kill, oops, that's a Freudian slip. We've got the Badger Cull coming up in August. I'm going to not say that again. And that's going to be on Exmoor, and there's another site in Gloucestershire. It's just another policing challenge. I'm not particularly fazed by it, but it will require some police resources. And then further down the line we've got the construction of the new reactor at Hinkley Point, which again is likely to prompt some protest and will be a bit of a potential policing headache for us. I guess the challenge for me as Chief Constable is, bearing in mind this shrinking budget, is to try and do all the sensible things that we can financially to make sure that the money goes from places that you don't see, and the money stays and the people stay in places where you can see them. We've got here today, if you ask me any really hard operational questions, we've got Katie at the back, PCSO, and Bill, where's Bill, local beat officer, also at the back. They're the people who are going to answer your hard questions if you want to know any specific questions about specific streets here. And what I'm trying to do is to save money, having fewer and fewer bosses. We're going to get people like John working a bit harder by reducing the number of chief superintendents. That's going to be music to his ears, and we've already gone from 6 chief superintendent-led districts down to 3, although John's was always the biggest and the hardest, so his job hasn't changed. And we're going to have fewer and fewer bosses, because by making those changes it means we don't have to take as many people off the front line. And similarly, we're going to do the same by having less expensive buildings. We're probably going to have fewer cars actually as well. I always play the game when I go into a police station of count how many cars are in the yard not being driven. And this afternoon at 4 o'clock in Southmead the answer was 8. And I want to sort of bear down on those costs, because if we can control costs in that way, it means we don't need to take people off the front line. And the people who really matter are the people on the front line, even if they curse me for giving them fewer cars to drive around in. In terms of the type of policing that I believe in, I believe policing should be done with a smile on its face by people who hang around for long enough to get to know the communities they're policing, and who are very open and prepared to give a view and prepared to answer a question. And actually, if somebody comes in with a complaint, I think our first impulse should be to say, has this person got a point, rather than how can I prove this person wrong. And certainly the message that I give to operational officers all the time is to do 3 things. I say, if you do these 3 things, you won't go far wrong. And the first of them is, it's crucial that our staff act with integrity. That they're honest. We're public servants and we do a really important job. And if you can't rely on us to tell the truth, and if that means being brave and challenging misconduct when we see it, or telling the truth and coming up against powerful people and doing the honest thing, that's what we've got to do. It's crucial that we act with integrity. The second thing that I say is you've got to work hard. You know, we've got to be diligent. You know, that means sometimes, yes, staying behind at the end of the day and finishing something off, doing the right thing, because our communities absolutely depend on us. There's thousands of people queuing up want to join the police. They want the privilege of doing this job, and the ones who are in it should reflect the fact and respect the fact that that trust has been placed in them and do their absolute best. And then the third thing I say is that we should treat people fairly and with respect. I hate it, you know, we get really good people join the police, and in far too many cases within a year or two, I listen to them talking to each other, and they're talking this odd gobbledygook of jargon and abbreviations, and rather than saying I saw a bloke walking down the street, they say I saw a male at the location. And I think, I just don't understand the language you're speaking to me in, so what chance have the public got? And I think, you know, there is something about policing and police officers just remaining part of the community they serve, talking to people in language that they understand, treating them fairly and treating them with respect. And I say to officers, if you do those three things, act with integrity, work hard, and treat people fairly and with respect, you won't go far wrong. And I'm going to be chief here for at least the next 5 years. I don't care what else comes my way. There is no way that I'll leave. And in the next 5 years, I will be very, very boring and repetitive, telling our staff those things. And I hope they're things that you want to hear. And I hope that if there are other messages you want to hear, you tell me either directly or through Sue, and I'll do my best to be open, transparent, and responsive to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Stratford. As the Chief Constable has just said, I'm the commander for Bristol. So that means that I'm really responsible for the day-to-day delivery of all of your local policing services. Now, I've got 10 minutes to talk to you. I'm going to put a few slides up, but for those of you that can't see these, don't worry. There are some hard copies at the back, and they'll be made available at the end. First one then. That's that. Okay, Bristol, it's a big city. It's one of the 8 core cities outside London in the country. It's a thriving, diverse city. It's got a great nightlife, a successful business community, 2 universities. It's the regional centre. It also has some of the most deprived wards that sort of sit right next to some of the most affluent. And that generates crime. And that means that Bristol accounts for about 40% of all crime across the Avon and Somerset area. I'm afraid we account for about 50% of all the what we call serious acquisitive crime, which is burglary, robbery, car crime, and a lot of the high-end assaults. And Sue's already spoken about the tragic loss of life we saw in North West a couple of weekends ago, where young Jake Milton lost his life. So it's a more challenging policing environment. And to police that, we have about 1,150 police officers and police community support officers working out of 8 stations. And the bit which I'm responsible for is the bit which sits within the Bristol City Council boundary. So that's the context. If we now look at the actual next slide, you'll see that for all the things I've just spoken about, Bristol being quite a more difficult environment to police, we are being very successful together, ourselves, the City Council, the Probation Service, the Health Service, the Prison Service, all the agencies coming together to continually bear down on crime. About 10 to 12 years ago, you'll see from the graph on the left that crime was about double the rate that we see in Bristol today. If you compare Bristol to the other core cities, back then we were the second worst per head of population for crime levels. Today we are the second best. So we are seeing dramatic improvements in community safety. And it's probably too small to see on the bottom there, but what does that look like in practice? Each day we get about 6 burglaries of people's houses across the city, 2 robberies, 3 vehicles get stolen, and 8 vehicles get broken into. So that's the level of crime, of acquisitive crime, across the totality of Bristol. So for all the points I've made about it being more challenging, the city is becoming safer and safer, and is a very safe place to live. What I intend to do now is just put a bit of meat on the bones of the 4 priorities that Sue has set us. And that's probably a bit small, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time dwelling on that, other than to say that year to date, so in the first 2 months of this financial year, we're performing fairly well. We're seeing crime coming down, we're seeing satisfaction levels going up. The areas of performance challenge are around the reporting of domestic violence. So we're not seeing reported domestic violence increasing as we would hope. More on that later. Going into each one of those 4 areas in a little bit more detail, if we talk about the first area, the first priority area that Sue set us, which is tackling domestic and sexual violence, particularly towards women and children. Last year we saw a 1.8% decrease in reported sexual offences. Now we don't see that as a success because we know that sexual violence is dramatically underreported. Likewise, we saw a 7% reduction in reported domestic violence. Again, we don't see that as a success. We're trying to drive up the level of reporting in those crime areas. Over 50% of sexual offences reported to us we brought to justice, and just under 40% of domestic violence offences we actually brought to justice. How are we improving that performance? Well, when we look at domestic and sexual violence, how do I put this? The police aren't always the first agency that a victim wishes to see. And the way that we drive up reporting and our subsequent ability to bring offenders to justice in those areas is by working with other agencies to drive up the confidence that victims have to actually come forward and report what's happened to them in the first place. And actually our primary concern will be to make sure that the victim gets the care which they need. Now that might be somewhere away from what we wish to do in order to secure and preserve evidence in order to have a successful prosecution later on. But the first thing going through the mind of a victim who's just been the victim of, for example, a sexual offence isn't always I want this person brought to justice. It's I need help and I need care and I need people to support me. So we've got a range of projects in place like the Sexual Assault Referral Centre based at the bridge in the centre of town. We provide independent sexual violence advisors to victims of sexual violence. We've got officers who are trained first response officers who are the first people that will actually meet a victim in order to actually provide them with the care and support they need. So that's just a little cameo of the many bits of work we've got in progress in order to provide better care and support to victims of these terrible offences. And in doing so, later on down the road, we hope to drive up the reporting, drive up the gathering of evidence, drive up the rate at which we actually bring offenders to justice. But that's not always the first thought on our mind when we respond to such incidents. Moving into the second priority area, which is preventing and reducing burglary and the fear of burglary. This is one area where we are being very successful. Bristol is seen nationally as at the cutting edge of how to manage offenders. Across the city, we've got a cohort of some 600 to 700 prolific offenders, quite a small number of people that we know commit the vast majority of offences. At any one time, about a third of them will be in prison, so we're looking at the other third, and at any one time, probably only about 10 to 20 are out there today, this evening, on this beautiful evening, looking to commit crime. Now, in order to continue to drive down crime, we are getting better and better at gathering intelligence on those individuals and on surgically targeting them through our tasking processes to make sure we know who they are, we know where they are, we know what they're going to get up to, and we get there first, and we effectively interdict their crime. Over the last year, we reduced domestic burglary of people's houses by about 12%, we, as it says there, if you are those people that are unfortunate enough to be one of those 6 per day, we will always aim to get there within an hour with our initial response officers. Shortly after that, some of our specialist burglary investigators will actually come along to pick up the investigation and make sure the investigation is driven robustly and quickly from the word go. And we also commit to you having a follow-up visit some 2 or 3 days later when things have settled down, the shock of the offence is perhaps a little less raw, you start to notice other things that may have gone missing, you start to pick up the serial numbers of items that have been stolen, etc., etc. So we've started to sharpen up our initial response to burglaries, and also we're always improving our multi-agency working post-conviction in order to actually better manage that small number of people that commit all the offences. Moving on to antisocial behaviour, as you'll see there, we get about 28,000 calls per year. That's reducing slightly. As Sue said earlier, antisocial behaviour can have a hugely corrosive effect upon communities and victims. So one thing which we've really tried to do in recent years is to better identify those victims that are highly vulnerable at the earliest opportunity. And then we've got various teams in place and various staff in place to actually provide a bespoke care plan to those individuals. Antisocial behaviour will affect different communities and different individuals in a variety of different ways. And so again, we look to assess that and we look to provide the best possible care to the victim. We also work very closely with Bristol City Council, putting in place longer term problem solving approaches to actually prevent antisocial behaviour from occurring in the first place. And also, when I speak to my neighbourhood teams, they tell me that one of the best ways to stop antisocial behaviour is still good old-fashioned enforcement. So we will use the full range of antisocial behaviour legislation which we have at our disposal. And they do tell me that contrary to what you read in the press sometimes, which is amongst young offenders, and ASBO can be seen as something of a badge of pride, actually quite the opposite. It can have a very limiting effect upon that individual's antisocial behaviour. So we will quite robustly enforce that legislation where necessary. There's also a great programme being rolled out by Bristol City Council at the current time, the Troubled Families Programme, part of a wider national initiative, and that will, over the next 3-year period, we're about 1 year into this already, with the City Council we will identify the 1,350 most troubled or troublesome families, and each one of them will be given an individual from the family intervention team who will work very closely with that family in order to better manage their behaviour and the impact they have upon their neighbourhood. And finally, putting victims at the heart of our criminal justice system. Over the last few years we made some and continue to make improvements to the way we manage rules when they first come into the organisation. We're looking to improve our attendance and the actions which are taken by our officers at the scene, making sure that their focus isn't always just pure investigation. They approach an investigation in a very victim-focused way, understanding what the needs of the victim are, explaining what we're going to do, answering questions, providing a point of contact, making sure we keep in touch with victims and provide them with updates. We know that those are all the behaviours which actually make victims feel valued, whether or not we are successful at solving that crime. So we're continuing to improve and put some work into those areas, and it seems to be working. We are seeing a steady improvement in our victim satisfaction rates. Over 8 out of 10 of our victims surveyed tell us that they are satisfied with the services we deliver. We know that's not good enough, we're not complacent, and we intend to drive it still further. That's, I hope, a quick run through what we're actually doing in Bristol in order to better deliver the 4 priority areas that Sue, as Police and Crime Commissioner, has given to us.
Thank you.
Okay, now to the important part of this meeting. It's now open to you to ask any of us questions. So, please go ahead.
Good evening. Sorry, just hang on a second.
Around the Poets Park area of Upper Horfield, and thanks to the hard work of our support officers and our local beat teams over numerous years now, antisocial behaviour has dropped a lot. We really have got a good team, but I've now been told that we're going down to 1 support officer, not just for Upper Horfield but the whole of Horfield. How does that make sense?
you like me to answer that? The microphone. If you are, that is a short-term measure. One or two PCSOs are being moved within the city in order to staff other programs. One of them being the Troubled Families program that I mentioned earlier. We have 110 police and community support officers within the city, and we have no plans in the immediate future to reduce that. So that will be a short-term vacancy, not a long-term plan. Short-term will be, I think we're in the process of redeploying some officers from other parts of the county, and we will also shortly be advertising to recruit some more.
Okay. But I think there's an inescapable point, which is the point I made before. I tell you, I'd like nothing more than to be told tomorrow by the Chancellor that actually we're going to get 10% extra in the policing settlement. Meanwhile, back in the real world, I know that to grab a figure out of thin air is probably the best bet would be about 8%, and an 8% reduction. So we can see the budgets are shrinking, and that's obviously the conversation that we know we'll be having with communities about the extent to which the local taxpayer steps in to compensate for those big reductions that are taking place from a national funding perspective. But I'm really happy for people to come along and look at the books, look at the numbers, look at what we've got, look at the estate, look at the senior management cost, look at the fleet cost, and look at the cost of people on the front line, and see if they've got any insights, and they can see a trick that we're missing. But fundamentally, I think we've got pretty bright people on the budget. I think they're doing a good job. But if you're having your budget cut by something in the order of 10%, that will mean, in the end, fewer people on the front line. And we'll regret it, but we don't decide what our budget will be.
Yes, the lady with the blue dress.
I'm Jenny Smith, Councillor for Southmead. Can I first of all thank Sue Mountso-Stevens for keeping the PCSOs. I'm sure everyone in the room feels the same as we do. We needed to keep them. And thank you, because we detected the Mayor didn't see the importance until you and us pointed it out. Antisocial behaviour, I'm being told that's gone up 10% from April to April in Southmead, and we're also getting arson attacks on cars, wheelie bins, all sorts of things, which is really worrying. It's like seeing a slide back, and I hope it doesn't spread outside our area. But first of all, my first question then, and I've got three, one for each of you I think, to John Stratford, have you got any ideas how we can address that? And can I tie that up for all of you, because we've had our youth clubs closed, and we have now got gangs on the streets. We've got all sorts of minor things going on, but you can see it's beginning to come out of the woodwork because they're bored. And by not having a decent youth facility, which is what we've had, and it runs over our borders into Henbury and to Hallfield, so it doesn't remain with us. And my last question is to Sue Mount-Stevens. How do you apply for your money? We've got a road called Doncaster Road. There is no pedestrian crossing along the whole of Doncaster Road. It has a nursery, it has an adventure playground, and it has a school. We've got some money out of the hospital money towards a pedestrian crossing. We really think we need two. And if we could have some money, that would really help to build at least one pedestrian crossing, which would also help to slow down traffic in the area. Thank you.
Okay, dealing with the antisocial behaviour in the Southmead area, the example you give actually is a good illustration of the kind of double whammy which the police service is suffering at the current time. Because, as the Chief Constable has pointed out, not only are we seeing a reduction in our own budgets, but as the budgets of other agencies reduce, so that can lead to increased demand for our services, because we become effectively the service of last resort. That doesn't mean to say that we're still not determined to do everything we possibly can to address the problems you raise. It's very topical on a lovely evening like tonight, because we know at this time of year, as the weather gets better, we do see a rise in antisocial behaviour. We run operations by our neighbourhood teams that are planned to address that. It's important that residents continue to let us know whenever they are suffering antisocial behaviour, and don't simply suffer in silence. That's why in some respects an increase in antisocial behaviour can be seen in a positive light, because it means that people are increasingly confident to report it because they know that we will act upon it. And the neighbourhood teams will be out and about, they will be highly visible, they will be using their enforcement powers, as I said earlier, and they will also be working with other agencies like the City Council to put in place longer term problem solving approaches. That might be looking to see whether we can, what can we do with young people that no longer have a youth club. There are no magic wands. It is a very difficult time, this age of austerity, but you can rest assured that the neighbourhood teams will be doing everything they possibly can to address those problems.
Thank you for your words about the PCSOs. As I said, that they do have our full support, but I would like to just make it clear that PCSOs cannot be ring-fenced. I cannot protect them when we have, depending on what the Chancellor says tomorrow, there may be some big changes, because when you've got 80% of your budget that is made up of people, then when there are, if we're going to be asked for a 8%, 10% cut in 15-16, there's only one place that we can look. But I will make sure that with the Chief Constable that we look everywhere else before that happens. But and if it does mean closing certain stations, I will make sure I want more officers and PCSOs before I want empty buildings. So that's where the priority will be. But being the fact that we are going to have a different way of working because of the fact that we have got fewer officers and PCSOs, one of the areas that I do want to look at, and I have asked the Chief to look at, is working out ways that we can support and strengthen our neighbourhood watches. There are several, I think, coordinators maybe here today, but we are very clear, I am very clear, that we need to support you in a far more productive way, and also for there to be far more of a dialogue. It is not a monologue going from one way to another. In order to reinforce, to motivate people to get involved in neighbourhood watches, there has to be feedback from the police to tell you what's happened, to tell you what to tell you the good things and the bad things, but there has to be a conversation, and that is an area that we are looking at, and that we do want to strengthen. Regarding the grant for the pedestrian crossing, I'm looking desperately at my team here, but I suspect that this is not going to be a way forward, in as much as I think pedestrian crossings come under Bristol City Council. But if you'd like to see one of the team afterwards, we will discuss. We can show you the ways. We've got application forms over in the room to show you how you can apply. I'm not sure whether it can be for pedestrian crossings though. Okay. Gentleman over here.
Oh. All right. Don't need this. My name is Igor. I'm one of the neighbourhood watch coordinators on the French down end border. And the reason for being here really is to follow up with Sue on something I raised with her 6 months ago, which is associated with the police support for neighbourhood watch and the coordinators. Now these sort of processes really are to do with crime prevention. They are all about making sure people are aware of what to look out for. And part of that service was the ringmaster, which provided information about the crimes in the area and what to look out for in particular. And people found this very useful. Now I'm not going to bang on about the wonders of neighbourhood watch, because I do find it rather exclusive, because it only applies to those people who are actually in a neighbourhood watch, and actually the numbers there are about very small. Now I primed both Sue and hopefully Nick got the letter as well, as to how we can work with the police, with the voluntary sector, and bring back that ringmaster, not just as it was, but actually be much more open, much more accessible for those people who might be transitory within Bristol, may not have neighbourhood watches in their area. But the underlying part, or what I want to say, is that yes, crime figures are going down for various reasons. But a large part of that is if you know something is going on in your area, you can look out for it. It's just very much, the analogy I always use is the World Health Organization. If you know that SARS or whatever is coming across, you put in place provision to minimize that effect, and everyone is warned of that. Now that, I can't underscore that enough. Not just as an analogy, but also the way that people within a watch treat that information. Importantly, that information has not been with us now for 6 months at least. That has to be replaced. Now there was at one stage talk of a replacement system which I think was called Web version 4, and as far as I know, that has not come into being at all. Now the question I would like to ask is, where are we now? Where are we going?
Thank you. I think the answer.
Well, on the question of technology, there just seems to be something about the way that technology is provided to the policing, particularly IT, that there is just congenitally weak, and I think that's probably because we are a fragmented customer across the police service, and successive attempts to do something about that have been frustratingly slow to deliver, and in many cases haven't delivered. I don't know where we are with version 4 of the webmaster, but we'll take it away and have a look. The other point that you raise is this question of support to Neighbourhood Watch. Sue has asked me to look across the kind of watch industry, if you like. We've got Neighbourhood Watch, we've got Community Speed Watch, we've got Farm Watch, we've got all sorts of vehicles for community activism, and I think that it's increasingly important as your police force shrinks in size that you make it worthwhile for people, that you incentivise that, and you provide effective support. I talked a little bit earlier about some of the things that we're doing to manage the steady budget reductions, and one of them is that in a police force that's shrinking like that is to be more insistent that the centre has a grip. Now, in recent times, it's been great to be a local chief superintendent. Indeed, I used to be one in Leicester, and I had enormous scope to decide what I did and didn't have. And we were very devolved police forces. But devolution within the police force is very expensive. And what's happening now is the grip is coming back to the centre, and that will be one of the characteristics of the next few years. And certainly as Chief Constable, I don't propose to tolerate a situation whereby if somebody happens to live in one district, they do get support to Neighbourhood Watch, and if they live in a neighbouring district, they don't get support. And I can tell you now that at South Gloucestershire the support to Neighbourhood Watch is of a very high standard. So a piece of work commissioned by Sue, I've asked one of the Assistant Chief Constables to take a look at it and report back to me. When the report comes back, we'll decide what to do at our Chief Officer group, but it will have two characteristics. The first is more consistent support, and the second is a recognition that we cannot let that slip. And the time of austerity isn't an excuse for letting support slip. Actually, it's a time when we need to intensify our support because we're more dependent on communities than ever. And I think that goes back to your question, Councillor Smith, about volunteering and about youth clubs and all of those things. Again, we need to be very active in stimulating activism and stimulating communities to get involved in helping themselves, because the role of the state is shrinking. And we need to turn the spotlight on you, sir, but we need more people dressed like you who are prepared to get involved in things like scouting, and not just for fun, for dressing up, actually doing it as well. But we need people getting involved and providing activities for young people and being involved in taking some responsibility themselves for communities. And the police service has a role in stimulating and promoting that. And I think the two issues are entirely linked.
It's interesting to hear that you're looking to centralise more in the sort of near future than it has in the past. The current position, as I understand, is the Neighbourhood Watch support has been devolved to local police stations. Well, that is simply not working. Let's get that absolutely clear across
information that is needed is actually with the centre, with the collection of information, and then it's actually dispersal. So where we are at the moment is, I can only use the word unsatisfactory.
Thank you. I just would like to say that it is working in some areas. I've heard that from residents, but the whole essence of what we're saying is it's not consistent, and that's why we're doing this review of looking across the patch, finding out what works. You know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here because we've got some fantastic operations that are going on now. We just have to look at what works and then make sure and roll it out across the whole of Avon and Somerset, and that's what we're trying to do.
And I don't think I said centralise. I think what I said was have a tighter central grip. And it's not about disempowering local commanders, but it's about spelling out the standards from the centre that we expect of our local leaders and the standards to which they must adhere. If you centralise everything, you'll end up with some kind of Napoleonic superforce that is too unwieldy and utterly unresponsive. So I'd be careful about, giving an idea that it's all about centralisation, but I do think clearer standards and reducing variation is really important, particularly in a climate like this one.
Can you check this as well, Ken?
All right. Thank you, Sue. Could I ask why the police station is being closed there? We've got over 200 odd acres now of the new park. How's that going to be policed? Lowestown. And also, I went to one of these neighbourhood partnership meetings and I brought up twice about the mobile police station, and I asked for it to be, come up Engagement Square. Yes, they said, I haven't heard anything about it since. But if you go to different places like Henley's, they're up there quite often.
If you want the mobile police station here, we will send it here. We'll have a conversation after the meeting. You tell me when you want it, it will be up here. When it comes to the closing of the police station, I think I'm going to allow the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable to handle that one. I really understand the symbolism of having a local police station in the heart of the community. I do understand that. I just repeat the point that the Police and Crime Commissioner said earlier, which is we'd rather have officers out on the streets and PCSOs out on the streets rather than be paying for expensive empty buildings. And so please don't equate the visible building there, whether it's open or not, with how effectively we are delivering local policing services. In the 21st century there are other ways of doing it other than having police stations sprinkled around the city.
Could you answer my popular question I asked? How are you going to police the new park? Is that 250 odd acres? What's going to happen to that? Are you sharing it with South Gloucestershire or what?
Sorry, I don't understand.
It's a massive area.
Okay, I'm not cited on the full details of that park. I will have a local policing commander who is. Bill, do you know about that?
Last year, Pete? Yeah. Last year. Over 250 acres.
Well, there's two questions, and actually it's a choice between the two, isn't it? If you've got people sitting in police stations waiting for somebody to come to them, in a time of reducing budgets, you've actually got fewer people available to you to get out and police your parks over there. So I think that what we need to do is look really carefully at our estate. If you look across the public sector, police, probation, local authorities and others, we occupy far too many buildings and far too much building space that costs far too much cash. And I think it makes evident sense for us to shut a few of them down, share a little bit more sensibly, provide single points. Go out of Bristol and look at somewhere like Weston-super-Mare, where there used to be 9 front doors off the high street for people to go and access services. Now there's 1, and we've gone in with the council, and it costs us all a lot less, and we can provide a better service to people coming in. And I think that's what we need to do here. And then the cash that we save by doing that enables us then to ensure that we don't cut policing presence in the parks. But you can shake your head all day long. The point is, if the budget's going down, I'd love you to come and show me which trick we're missing, but I think what we're doing is we're making a sensible job of difficult decisions and trying to keep as many people out there as we can. But one of the ways we're trying to do that is by closing buildings that are underused.
Thank you. My name's Alan Mitchell, and I just been reading your email, Sue. Thank you for it. But you've got it wrong. It's not about noise that I am complaining. It's antisocial behaviour and harassment. Can you explain to me why the officers that have attended, and it has been explained to them, have not taken this seriously?
Okay.
I have a list of collar numbers.
Okay, let me just, before, if this is a specific issue that you have taken...
It's personal,
yeah.
Yes.
Do you think we can take that after this meeting and we'll address it between you and me afterwards? It's not that it's private, it's just the fact that...
I don't mind it being out in the public.
I would just like to have more details before I comment, but if John, if you just want to make a comment about it, we'll take it offline afterwards,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Yeah, it would be inappropriate to discuss a live case in an open meeting like this, other than to say it is being taken seriously. It has been the subject of a case conference with Bristol City Council. The officers in Bristol are working upon it. There's two sides to the story, and it is being dealt with by the staff. And that's about as far as we can talk about it in this open forum, but it is being taken seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm still, I think, one of the councillors for Lock Lees. I wanted to make a couple of points. One, to support my friend at the back who's asked for the mobile police station. Lock Lees has one of the highest levels of deprivation in Bristol. And I know on a lovely sunny evening like tonight, it may not be very visible, but we do have to take that seriously, especially in a time of extreme recession. And I also want to support my colleague Jenny Smith with regard to youth provision and leisure services. Just across the way is the Adventure Playground, which has been here for over 30 years. It's both a youth centre and adventure playground, and at present it's threatened with closure. There's no money from the council to pay for it anymore. We're quite concerned about the implications of that, and I was very glad to hear Sue say she believed in joined up thinking and community approaches to policing, because I think the danger is that if that adventure playground closes, then we will see consequences which might be unforeseen at the moment, which is kids around here have very little to do apart from go to the bench. We need to make sure that it's kept open, and I hope we can work together to ensure that that happens.
Thank you. We will be working closely together, but we all have limited funds, and one of the things that have come out from the Community Action Fund is that we've looked at ways on having youth diversionary projects which residents are owning, and that we can make a small contribution. But there is no extra pot of gold. Having a PCC is not going to suddenly, you can imagine that when the newbie on the block turns up, that everyone then writes thinking that I'm going to arrive on the magic carpet with a lot of money. One, no magic carpet. Two, no pot of gold. Gentleman in the blue.
Hi, good evening. My name is Gary Murphy from Brislington. My question was under the heading of antisocial behaviour and road safety. There's a stretch of road which runs from Lawrence Hill past St Philip's Causeway, Avonmead, Showgate Cinema, then becomes the A4, heading out towards Bath, which is used on a regular basis as a drag strip by boy racers. They use the Avonmead car park as their their club ground. Is there anything that can be done to tackle that?
Yes, there is. Let us know the details. We'll be down there and we'll address the antisocial behaviour which those boy racers are causing.
Okay.
Okay, this one's one for Sue. One you mentioned earlier was one of your priorities going to be improving road safety, and it ties in nicely with yours. one thing that the recent elected Mayor of Bristol, George Ferguson, has suggested is turning back on the speed cameras. Now, I'd like to know your view on this particular matter, and I know it's very controversial to everyone in here. So, yeah, if you just...
Okay. I'm delighted to give you my view. It may be slightly different to the constabulary's view, only in as much as I can obviously say things that maybe the police can't. But I'm very clear that we have, you can see, you know, the yellow boxes around. You can, when we look at the evidence, now this is being very simplistic evidence, and I, you know, just only because these are figures that I can remember. But when we brought in the speed cameras in 2003, there was about 80 people that were being killed each year. 2011, when they were switched off, that number had come down to about 40. Now, remembering that is still been quite a surprise, having, even though that we've been indulged in this public dialogue, that still quite a few people still don't know that the cameras have been switched off. Okay, but the number of people killed is slowly increasing. It is now back up to about 60. Okay, now it is going to be, and I am very clear that a combination of the fixed cameras and the mobile cameras, okay, and offering education to to try to educate people to keep within the speed limits is absolutely key. Now, I know that there are people who see it as a cash cow. I can tell you that as far as if anyone is fined, that money goes straight to the Treasury. It doesn't come anywhere close to us. The money that is raised by Avon and Somerset Constabulary is from the education courses, and what we are doing is that Nick has approached the local authorities across Avon and Somerset to say that we will share some of that money so that it becomes cost neutral for the police and for the local authorities. So I would like them switched on, and the constabulary have made that offer to local authorities, but it is for the local authorities to come back.
Okay, could I just say one more thing? 'Cause listening to everyone around the room, one of the big things they said is they don't have enough money for stuff, and all I hear you obviously mention is we're in times of austerity at the moment, and money is obviously very tight. You know, you don't have much to play with. When they were switched off in 2011, obviously it was Avon and Somerset's safety camera partnership, as they called themselves. They were costing £60,000 a year, if my figures are correct, with the opportunity of us then spending £405,000 on upgrading them into digital cameras, you know, to replace the old Gatso cameras that just had film in them. Also, that's in 2011, so we've then got 2 years of road use and rubbing off all the lines in the road and then calibrating the new cameras and everything. How could you justify spending upwards of £500,000 on installing cameras, which, if you ask a lot of motorists, they don't actually like, you know? And actually, to quote a few figures, a report from the motor insurance company LV said that 80% of drivers said they look at their speedos speedometers, rather than looking at what's in front of them on the road when they see a speed camera. And then also, a further 5% said they'd like to brake suddenly to avoid getting a fine and deal with the rear end shunt, rather than accept going through the camera at the rate that they were going at.
I think it's probably worth bearing in mind that 82.7% of statistics are made up on the spot. It's really difficult, is this, and I think we should be driven by the evidence. I think the reliable evidence, the most reliable evidence I've seen, is the latest report from the RAC, which actually builds on a body of previous evidence that says, on balance, it is likely that speed cameras have the effect of reducing speed at the time of casualty, and that we also know that when speeds are lower at the time of collision, when the speeds are lower at the time of collision, fewer people die. Simple. And there's a strong body of evidence to support that. I think that the speed cameras should take their place in a strategy of speed enforcement that has something to do with fixed cameras, something to do with mobile cameras, and indeed I've just authorised the extension of our mobile programme to buy some motorbikes, so we can put them on the side of the road in those areas where actually it's too narrow to get a van in, but they're nevertheless, you know, speeding rat runs and places that are dangerous. And I think the cumulative impact of those things is that those cameras and that enforcement programme and that doubt in drivers' mind has the effect of making people drive more slowly and making other people behave but less likely to be injured if there's to be a collision. That is up against a very, very powerful industry that has a vested interest in producing and protecting and preserving the motor industry, the sexy image of cars hurtling down country roads that take your breath away, as the advert has it, etc., etc., etc. And I think those vested interests have proved extremely effective at muddying the argument and dotting out some of those statistics of the sort that you described from the LV there, which I think are in the main questionable, and some of them are downright spurious. And my job is not to sell cars, not to preserve the romance of Alfa Romeo, or the breathtaking nature of Peugeot, or the Vorsprung-Technik of Audi, but to try and keep the roads as safe as we can keep them in this area. And in my judgment, having looked at the evidence, the best way of doing that is to have an integrated speed enforcement strategy that makes use of this asset, rather than having it sitting on a roadside and people laughing at it.
Yeah, 100%. I will sit down after this. My core here isn't about road safety. I'm 100% behind everything you're saying in terms of reducing road deaths and road accidents. But another thing in terms of statistics was, this was from the Department of Transport, it's obviously one of yours. Some would say. But they said only 9% of all serious accidents were caused entirely by speed, and in fact half of them were due to rider error and failure to look properly. And one of the things you did mention was some of the campaigns in terms of saying take your breath away and things like that. That is something that a lot of people I've talked to are very much behind, and they would prefer it if you're seen to get behind campaigns like that rather than the static cameras that everyone would appear to loathe.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Colin. A couple of questions for you. Firstly, you talked about victim support. Now, occasionally the police do make a mistake, and occasionally in doing that they make a wrongful arrest. Now, from what I can gather from the police complaints, that they won't investigate until after a court case. So, in the case of a wrongful arrest by mistake by a policeman, the victim has to go through the trauma of having to go through court, as I understand. I wondered whether you wanted to comment on that, or whether you wanted to instigate some other means of protecting the victim in those instances. Second question I have for you really relates to, I suppose, to road traffic accidents. I was always under the impression that it would be great to have a policeman on the scene with regards to a road traffic accident, because they would have a specialised first aid. Now, someone suggested to me that they only have a 2-day first aid course, which, to my way of thinking, is a very low first aid qualification, and probably find that there's a shopkeeper better qualified to deal with a road traffic accident than a policeman. And with regards to that, I would particularly like your comments on the rolling out of your police CPD with regards to the symptoms of concussion being similar to that of drunkenness, in order that they can deal with things correctly.
Let me answer the first part, and then Nick can answer the second. As far as complaints and how we do that, I am concerned that residents and the public have major concerns about the way that our complaints process is, and particularly sometimes I think there are decisions made where the police may put off an investigation because there is a case to happen. Now obviously if that case is going to be thrown into jeopardy, I can understand that, but maybe sometimes that argument is used too often. So we will be working very closely with Professional Standards Department to make sure that we can look at that afresh. But I take your comments on board, and I will be doing something about that. But regarding the second, that could be Nick.
Just a further point on the first. There are plenty of times when a professional standards investigation will carry on, notwithstanding the fact that proceedings are outstanding, if we think that it's sufficiently serious to justify that. On the question of first aid, I think the fact is that the people at the front line in policing the ones who are actually doing the response, earlys, lates and nights, going to collisions and all manner of things, they're probably the people who deal with the most uncertainty and complexity on a daily basis. You know, they go into situations not knowing what they're dealing with, as you say. The symptoms of concussion can be similar to the symptoms of drunkenness. They go to the full range of incidents, and they're the initial policing triage. And frankly, to train them for everything that they may encounter to an extent that we think would be adequate and fully equip them for all the challenges they face would be great, but it would probably leave them free to patrol about 100 days a year, because they need to be specialists in theft, in violence, in drunkenness, in vice, in licensing, in road traffic, in just the full range of things they're likely to encounter. And from time to time we update and modify the training to take account of changing times. I mean, a big thing at the minute that we're really needing to take a look at is our officers' training to deal with mental health issues, because they're encountering more and more mentally disordered people on the streets, and it's really tough for them, and they're not medical practitioners. And in some places, if you go to places like Scarborough or Leicester, you'll see that the police are actually sending a car out on the late shift where a mental health nurse is working side by side with an officer, because actually bringing the skills onto the streets is probably a better idea than trying to equip our patrolling people with a broader range of skills than is realistic. And in that context, we give people a bit of first aid training. You know, it's a couple of days. We encourage people to do more. We try and incentivise it, but I'm not sure what else would give way in our curriculum to enable us to give those officers more. And as things stand, a typical patrolling police officer would expect to be on the streets around 210 days each year, and I don't want it to slip much below that. So we're having to make some really hard choices.
Thank you. Amir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Amir Chima. I've got 2 questions, and probably I can provide some feedback around what I'm wearing. Good. Is that okay? Person? Okay. The questions I've got is around what proactive steps are being taken around preventing gold burglaries. That's still a concern within our community. We've done quite a lot of work, but we're still quite concerned about that. Second question around that is the faith community buildings are feeling very vulnerable at the moment, and the news of particularly in Gloucester recently and other areas. So what sort of steps are being taken to reassure people, and obviously preventative measures? If there's anything that can be done from the Muslim community perspective, then let us know. How can we be more engaged and be more involved and supportive from that perspective? With my other hat, you may have noticed I'm wearing something different. I'm the local Scouting District Commissioner, and I have got a building just in Lockleys, which is currently vacant, and I'm looking for volunteers and people. It's fully equipped to reopen a scout group in Lockleys. So if there's anybody who'd like to get involved, partner, support getting the adult leaders and the young people, I'm open to sort of getting that up and running, and even wider across the whole area in Avon as well. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to that? Yeah, good idea. Right.
Okay, Asian gold burglaries. Any burglary is a terrible offence, has a terrible impact upon the victim, and yeah, when I come in the morning and I see we've had every day I read the incident report, when I see we've had an Asian gold burglary, and you look at the value of the jewellery that's been stolen, and you understand the impact that will have upon the family, the fact that jewellery will have been in the family for so many years, it would have been passed from generation to generation, all that represents, and it's been stolen just to be melted down, you know, but it's a dreadful crime. We do have a dedicated team of detectives working on those cases. We have made arrests. We have had successful prosecutions. It's unfortunate that we know there is more than one team at work across the southwest of England. We share intelligence with forces around us to identify who they are, target them, arrest them, prosecute them. We're doing everything we possibly can. We will continue to do that. I do urge people that have such valuables in their houses to put in place proper crime prevention measures. Too often we find that when you look at the value of the gold which is in the house, I know it's difficult, I'm aware of the background factors, but actually please do everything we possibly can to ask that community to actually take care of their valuables. Your second question? Faith buildings. Yep. Particularly after the terrible events in Woolwich, we were aware of the rising community tension. We did have a couple of incidents of right-wing graffiti left on local faith buildings. We are investigating those. In the immediate aftermath of incidents like that, we do increase our presence around such buildings. In the longer term, it's not so much a question that's unsustainable, it can be counterproductive, because sometimes a highly visible policing presence can actually raise tension and attract and draw attention to issues. But you can rest assured our neighbourhood teams are aware of where those faith buildings are and are keeping an eye on them, and I hope you find this, and are building links with the users of those buildings and doing everything we possibly can to reassure those communities that we're there for them if they need us.
I'd just like to say one more thing about the wake of Woolwich, which had a lot of communities and police commanders holding their breath up and down the country, and of course you'll recall that there was very quickly after there was some EDL, English Defence League activity in Bristol. My reflection is just to say that across our communities, I think the response locally was something of which we should be very proud. And I think the policing response, when we had that march on the Saturday and we had the group of EDL people holed up in the Market Tavern, I think the response of officers was really resolute at a time when probably a lot of them would have rather been somewhere else. They really stuck in and did a good job, and the links that exist between the police and communities did really well, and that threat was neutralised, and I was extremely proud of the response and delighted with the way that we all worked together. And we just need to ensure that we remain that vigilant all the time, because there could be some turbulent times ahead, and we need to stick together and keep communication channels open. And it's certainly important that, I know somebody said earlier on, it seems to be all about austerity this evening. Well, there's still going to be £270 million spent on policing next year. We need to keep our eye on that particular ball and keep those relationships right, and keep our response at a very high level to that type of incident.
Mr. Levy at the back.
Thanks, man. Good evening, Sue. Pete Levy, Councillor for Hallfield. First of all, first of all, congratulations on the successes of your first 6 months, certainly with those and a number of other community-related issues. Good question, Sue, if I can, please. The Mayor's got an awful lot on his plate at the moment.
to make sure that we work very closely together. And, you know, my door is always open to councillors and to residents on working together on this. And I never forget that there are a lot of people who do not have access to the internet. I'm conscious all the time. My mum constantly tells me that she feels disenfranchised from lots of consultations because that it appears that it is only done through the internet. I can assure you that that's something we take very, very carefully, and that there are hard copies, and something that we're working with the constabulary is also to get really local newsletters out, because, you know, if you imagine that it could only be the government that could refer to a local PCC to be responsible for the whole of Avon and Somerset, I'm very clear that for locals it can mean maybe 1 or 2 or even 3 streets. So I'm very conscious of that, and I will never forget, but I'm very happy to work as closely as possible. Thank you.
Hello, I'm also Councillor for Warfield. My name's Claire Hiscott. So, general question to Sue. You stood very much wanting to tackle domestic and sexual violence, which I think is always going to be a crime that's underreported. I was wondering whether you have any plans to actually see this as something of a crime prevention campaign, and whether you have any interesting ideas for tackling that this sort of crime before it starts, and perhaps we might see in our communities they're just generally safer homes and families. Just wanted to see how you're going to tackle that, because in some ways it's good to support victims, but actually I don't think it's ever going to be well reported, and victims don't want to report, they just don't want to be victims.
You need a number of conditions to be in place that give people confidence. You know, one of them is that if you report something to the police, there'll be an preventative dimension and a preventative value. There's other things that go well outside of our sector. You know, what's happening in schools. You know, a lot of this is about conditioning and influencing the behaviours of young men in particular? You know, what are they learning? What is and is not acceptable? What are acceptable boundaries? What are acceptable ways of managing your anger? What is personal discipline and self-control about? And we go beyond that. Look at what the media are doing. I think the media, and particularly the news media, have been increasingly responsible in recent years. But nevertheless, when you look into certainly at the sort of stratum of the media around popular culture, there are some very, very disturbing and disconcerting messages that come out of certain types of music and certain music scenes out there, and we need to think about ways of influencing, amending, compensating, and balancing that. So whether it's what people have in the media, what they hear from the news, what they learn at school, what they see championed in the press, the response they hear from the police service, etc., etc. All of those things have an opportunity to either influence in a preventive manner or in a manner that is somehow tolerant, condoning and accepting of unacceptable behaviour. And of course the police service and we collectively have a big role to play in that, and we've devoted increasing resource to it over the years. Whether that Bristol is blessed with a highly effective team of officers who investigate serious sexual assault, Operation Bluestone, and we shout their achievements from the rooftops, because that in itself will have an effect that might just make people stop and think. So we all play our role. We continue to integrate our services through the safeguarding coordination units. I visited ours at our Kenneth Steele House building just a couple of weeks ago, and it's really gathering momentum. Yes, the cops are in there, probation have arrived, the social services and other city council staff are on their way, and there you have all of those specialists and professionals who have a role to play in this coming together, and they have the benefit both of improving the quality of response when something's happened, but also being able to pull different agencies' intelligence pictures so that we can spot where the threat's likely to emerge and perhaps intervene ahead of the event.
There's this gentleman here in the...
Evening. Just like to say thank you very much for coming to Lockleys today. When I got your invitation to come, I was quite surprised because we had actually booked this all ourselves, and seeing what you were coming was very important. We cancelled our meeting in order to there be no conflict.
Thank you.
Okay. My name is Martin Chin. I'm chairman of the main community group in the area in Lockleys called Lockleys Voice. I'm also chairman of the Lockleys Voice Neighbourhood Development Forum, which under the Localism Act has been given permission to create the neighbourhood plan. My questions basically are, I'd like to link up with yourself when it comes to creating our plan with any information the police might have to help our plan become more crime effective, because obviously we're talking about building new homes and home areas. We're talking about 800 new possible houses in the area. So any input the police could give us, when the design of that comes forward to reduce the risk of crime, we'd appreciate that. So if we could link up on that, would be great. As regards the police station, which is next door, we did speak to your officer who was in charge of the building when he was looking at selling the building and possibly off to a major retailer. I understand that possibly has fallen through, and the Bristol City Council are now considering purchasing your building. One of the questions I'd like to ask basically, if you're selling this police station in Lockleys, can I request that the majority of funds from that sale actually go back into this area and not just go into a central pot? So, thank you.
The fact that you let us have this room, much appreciated. My door is always open, and and it's very much for the role of the PCC is to make sure that I listen to such things as your Lockleys Voice, and for and I think if you spoke with your neighbourhood police team, or you come direct to me, and I will make sure that you go in the right direction. As far as saying, am I going to ring fence? Then I don't think you can be asking me to take that seriously. Well, you could be asking me to take that seriously, but the important thing about policing that it has to be where there is need. Okay, and I'm not saying it's not needed here, but I'm saying that we have to look across the whole of Avon and Somerset. And I'm in the same way as I won't ring fence officers, I won't ring fence PCSOs from what's going to come around the next corner. Neither will I ring fence money that from selling of buildings in order to go back into a certain project. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, I really would like to say thank you, first of all, to Nick and to John, and especially to the PCC's team who have worked really hard to get this evening off the ground. But a really big thank you to you, because this is all to do with having a dialogue between residents and the police, and it's only for you who've come to this evening, who have asked us questions, who've given us a lot of areas that we will address in the next few weeks. But it's really important that we listen very closely to your concerns, and I can assure you the things that you've told us today that we will take away and we will debate. But can I thank you once again, and especially on such a glorious sunny evening as tonight, but we very much appreciate it. Thank you.